Have you ever wondered how religions first arose? If you're a materialist and a proponent of a purely scientific approach, you're convinced that religion is an evolutionary mechanism to stabilize the psyche and society. In other words, behind the emergence of religions lies people's desire to find a cause and explanation for everything, the desire to control life through ritual, and also the need for common social norms and rules. That is to say, a materialist believes that religion was created by people themselves to organize and improve their own lives at a certain stage of social evolution. At the same time, the fact is undeniable that religion has been widely used at various times as a tool to obtain and even usurp power. If you're a religious person, you're convinced that religion was sent by God or the gods as a kind of higher law, as a certain requirement placed on us humans. After all, it's as if God himself wants us to live in a certain way and to worship him in a certain way. That is, a religious person is certain that his religion is from God, and that people, prophets, messiahs, teachers, are only the conduits of this divine will and word. But what if the true reason for the emergence of religions is actually shocking? And what if the gods to whom people pray are not gods at all? Listen to this video until the end, and you will learn many interesting things. Hello, my name is Tala Prutkova, and I live in Ukraine, where there is a war going on now. Almost every night I hear the sounds of shaheeds, the rockets, flying to destroy the lives of people around me. And my goal today is to do everything I can so that tomorrow not a single child wakes up to an explosion in the middle of the night and asks their mother why some people are killing other people. Some will think I'm a utopian, but no. I am saying what has already been said once on this planet, has been heard by many, but still has not been accepted. And those words are, God is love. Subscribe if you want to know more about Christ consciousness and absolutology as a new spiritual concept for united humanity. Even if you are a materialist, at least once in your life, you have participated in some religious ritual or ceremony. Perhaps you blessed eggs at Easter, or performed namaz, the Islamic prayer, sang Krishna's Mahamantra, performed puja, celebrated the day of the ancestors' souls, or slipped a note into the Wailing Wall. Almost every family has its own tradition, its own religious rituals and customs, and many people perform these rituals without giving a single thought to their origin and purpose. I come from a rather religious Christian family. Since childhood I attended church, and our family traditions were especially noticeable at Christmas and Easter. For example, at Christmas my parents and I would go to my great-grandmother's house, where she prepared 12 dishes, one of which was always kutia. Kutia is a ritual dish made from wheat grains with honey, poppy seeds, nuts, raisins, and other additions. At the same time, it has nothing to do with the birth of Jesus because kutia came to us from pagan times. It is, in fact, one of the clearest examples of how ancient pre-Christian rituals passed into Christian tradition. Long before Christianity, the Slavs, the Balts, and other farming peoples had winter ritual dinners during the winter solstice. It was a time when the old year died, the sun was reborn, and one had to honor the ancestors and gods of fertility. They would prepare a sacrificial dish from grain, a symbol of life sprouting after death. In other words, eating kutia at the Christmas Eve dinner has the meaning of honoring the gods of fertility. But what kind of gods are these? And who came up with the idea that they need to be appeased in exactly this way in order to receive a good harvest of wheat and barley? Where did the idea even come from that there are certain gods on whom the harvest, the weather, our health depend? And why is this idea to appease some god or gods in order to receive some positive result, money, health, luck, good relationships, career promotion, so widespread in all religious traditions? From a scientific point of view, it is generally believed that people sought to control life processes in this way to influence them. But admit it, do we tend to do something that yields results, or at least something that used to yield results? To repeat generation after generation the very same completely meaningless, purely metaphorical action, is that something a human being who throughout his development has sought ways to expend less energy to achieve better results would do? This question has always intrigued me. As someone with a master's in psychology, I always try to understand the motives of human behavior, and I make many observations and analogies. Know yourself and you will know the gods and the universe. It was written above the entrance to the Delphic temple of Apollo. So I propose to you a kind of reenactment that will help answer the question. How really did it occur to people to appease the gods? Imagine that you live in an ancient world with no electricity, no computers, no smartphones, and no internet. You are a child of nature. You are engaged in hunting and gathering. And in your conceptual universe, you have ideas like river, sky, deer, cold, I am hungry, I want sex. You fight with neighboring tribes over food, hunting tools, and women. You have a tribal chief, the most warlike and strongest one. The main task of your life is to learn to hunt skillfully, run fast, and fight. These very actions give you the best results in life. And then, one clear day, a spaceship appears in the sky above your settlement. But you do not know what a spaceship is. This phenomenon does not exist in your awareness. So you see a monster, a serpent that breathes fire and spews flames, or a heavenly chariot in thunder and lightning. From the ship, ordinary-looking astronauts come out, resembling today's NASA astronauts. But to you, these are not humans. They are celestial beings, gods, angels. They are magical aliens from another world. You are so shocked and awed by the appearance of these heavenly beings that you instinctively fall to your knees. Let's assume the goal of these cosmonauts is to help your tribe survive and develop. The level of life on their home planet is so high that they have begun to travel the galaxy on various missions to save backward civilizations. They pick the most clever, resourceful among you and begin, as best they can, to explain to him in simple terms the laws of farming. They give him certain seeds that have never been on Earth before, teaching him how to sow and cultivate them. They also teach him the basics of mathematics and astronomy, and explain that killing one another for food is wrong, that it's better to develop agriculture. They teach that it's better to form long-term alliances rather than breed with just anyone. They even possibly teach him the basics of medicine and hygiene. Having spent about 6 months in your settlement, they happily board their ship and fly off to another planet in search of even more miserable and primitive natives. And here the most interesting part begins. You realize that while these magical beings were with you, they fed you, you probably had warmth from their heating devices, they healed your sick. You felt cared for and received benefits that you previously had to win through battle and hunting. And now, once again, you must run through the forests after deer, freeze in the bitter cold, fight the elements. Everything that now preoccupies your mind is how to bring those gods and their care back. First of all, you elevate to the top of the social pyramid those people who personally communicated with the visitors from the ship. From now on, these become your spiritual elite, the priests. They have heard the laws and commandments directly from the gods themselves. These gods appeared to them, and evidently the priests know how to bring them back. Of course, that's not the case. The self-proclaimed priests have no idea how to actually contact the gods. But the power they gain from the people and the feeling of being elite appeals to them very much. So, they do not admit that they cannot control contact with any higher beings. Instead, they begin to feed the people promises. The gods are with us. The gods hear us. Soon the gods will send us prosperity. They will help us defeat our enemies. They will give health to our children, and so on. The priests try to invent various ways to restore contact, and this becomes a kind of ritual that all members of the community adopt. If the gods gave us wheat, then we can give it back by scattering the wheat, the priests suggest with confidence, and the entire tribe begins scattering wheat at dawn. The gods gave us wheat, so we need to boil porridge from it, to show them how we enjoy this porridge, and then they will return. The priests propose next, and the people, desperate to receive blessings from the sky, repeat the ritual. Isn't that how the tradition of eating kutia was born? It sounds quite logical. You may think I'm stretching this, but I'm far from the first person to believe that human cultures could have encountered beings whose technology seemed supernatural, and that they were then interpreted as gods. For example, author Erich von Däniken, in his book Chariots of the Gods, 1968, argues exactly this. that the gods in ancient myths may have been aliens. He points out that many artifacts of ancient cultures depict high alien technologies. Take the Ark of the Covenant, for example. According to the Bible, the Ark of the Covenant was a golden chest in which lay the stone tablets with the commandments, a vessel of manna from heaven, Aaron's staff. It was carried by Levites and stood in the Holy of Holies, and according to Scripture, it emanated a dangerous power. It killed those who touched it without permission. It burned and glowed. It could turn enemies to flight. Von Däniken sees the Ark not as a symbol of God's presence, but as a real technological device, something like a portable power generator or a communication device given by aliens. Von Däniken also thinks that the Kaaba may have an alien origin. This is the Black Cubic Temple, the main shrine of Islam, located in Mecca at the center of the Al-Haram Mosque. In the eastern corner of the Kaaba is embedded the black stone, which pilgrims kiss or touch during the Hajj. According to Islamic tradition, it was brought by the archangel Gabriel, and it fell from the sky. It was white but turned black from human sin. Erich von Däniken suggests the sacred stones of many religions are fragments of celestial devices that once touched earth. He adds, the Kaaba likely also has at its foundation a heavenly object, a meteorite or an alien artifact, which later became an object of worship. Among other evidence that Earth was visited by aliens in ancient times, von Däniken cites the astronaut depiction in the Temple of Palenque, the megaliths of Baalbek in Lebanon, and the Nazca lines. It is also worth noting the astronomical knowledge of the Dogon tribe in Mali. This is discussed in the research The Sirius Mystery by Robert K. G. Temple. The author asserts that the Dogon had very precise knowledge about the companion star Sirius B even before it was discovered by astronomers with telescopes. The myths of the Dogon contain very specific technical or astronomical information: the orbital period, the number of bodies, the symbolism. Temple interprets this as traces of knowledge given, transferred by aliens. In addition, in Dogon mythology, there are legends about gods who descended from the sky, the so-called Nomo. Another author, Zechariah Sitchin, who studied Sumerian cuneiform texts, claims that the gods of the Sumerians are aliens from the 12th planet of the solar system, Nibiru, and the well-known esotericist and channeler Sel Rachel describes human history in even more detail and directly points out that various alien races participated in the development and genetic modeling of the human species. Some of these races, he says, treated humans condescendingly, and the very fact of worshipping these beings is a consequence of the so-called fall of the aliens and their spiritual pride. Sel Rachel asserts that the representatives of the Sirius civilization who came to Earth, among whom he even names the Old Testament God Jehovah, enjoyed being worshipped and willingly played the role of gods for the earthlings, who were far behind them in development, and were impressed by the aliens' knowledge and technology. Confirmation of this hypothesis can even be found in the Bible itself, where it explicitly says that the God Jehovah is jealous, demands worship, sacrifices obedience, that he is vengeful, and competes with other gods for the love of people. If it seems to you that this evidence isn't enough, let's consider a completely real story from our recent past. It's about the phenomenon known as the cargo cult. During World War II, on some islands of Melanesia, a collection of Pacific archipelagos, astonishing religious movements arose, the so-called cargo cults. From cargo, the goods transported by ship. They emerged among the local natives after contact with civilized aliens, mainly the American military. The Americans who were fighting the Japanese set up military bases on these Pacific islands. They built airstrips where planes would land. Sometimes planes didn't even land. They just dropped cargo and flew away. So, cargo, goods that the locals had never even dreamed of, arrived or fell from the sky. The islanders had never seen white people, so they watched them in awe. And what amazed them even more was how many amazing things the aliens had: lighters, flashlights, shiny tins of jam, steel knives, clothing with gleaming buttons, shoes, tents, colorful pictures of white women, bottles of firewater, whiskey, and many other wonders, and all these came from the sky as cargo. After some observations, the natives came to a strange conclusion. The Americans didn't work for all these riches. They didn't grind grain, didn't hunt, didn't gather coconuts. Instead, they drew mysterious lines on the ground, put strange headphones on their heads, and shouted incomprehensible words. Then they lit fires or turned on floodlights, waved flags, and metal birds flew in from the sky, bringing new treasures. The Americans exchanged these things for coconuts, shells, or the smiles of young island girls. Sometimes the Americans lined up in neat columns, stood in rows, shouting incomprehensible words, and that too, apparently, worked. But then the war ended. The Americans packed up their tents, said goodbye, and flew away on their iron birds. Flashlights, canned food, and especially bottles of firewater no longer fell from the sky. The natives were not lazy. They worked from morning till night, but no matter how hard they tried, they could not produce even the canvas tents or the fine clothing or the cans of stew. It seemed unfair. And then they asked themselves, why do good things fall from the sky for the whites, but not for us? What are we doing wrong? Suddenly they figured it out. To receive the magical gifts, we have to do exactly what the whites did: wear headphones, shout into microphones, build airstrips, light fires, and wait. Surely all of this must be magical rituals that bring the cargo. After all, it was obvious. No American had produced any of it himself. It all fell from the sky after those rituals. When anthropologists arrived on the islands of Melanesia a few years later, they were shocked. On the island, a new religion had arisen, one that humanity had not known before. Everywhere were bamboo posts tied with ropes. In the jungle, paths had been cleared to serve as runways. People built towers with antennas, waved colored mats. Others, in headphones made of coconut halves, shouted something into bamboo microphones. On the runways stood straw airplanes. The natives' bodies were painted like military uniforms with the letters USA, and homemade medals adorned their chests. They marched in formation, holding woven rifles. Of course, no airplanes arrived, but the natives believed they must not be praying enough and continued their rituals, lighting fires, calling out to the gods, and waiting. Gradually, priests emerged who knew exactly how to march and scolded those who broke the rituals. The priests occupied a special place in the natives' society, enjoyed a privileged position, and promised that soon the gods would return and bring blessings. The locals no longer had any time for work or fishing. All their energy went into performing rituals. The anthropologists sounded the alarm. The tribes were starving. They began sending humanitarian aid. And this, of course, ultimately confirmed the righteousness of the cult. After all, cargo had fallen from the sky again. The followers of the cargo cult did not know what production or trade were. Their ideas about Western society, science, and economy were foggy. They sincerely believed that the foreigners had connections with the spirits of ancestors and that these spirits sent down riches from the sky, so all that was needed was to perform the rituals, pray, and believe. Similar cults arose independently on different islands, distant from each other, not only geographically but also culturally. Anthropologists recorded dozens of cases. In New Caledonia, the Solomon Islands, Fiji, and New Guinea, usually these movements arose on their own, with no connection between each other. In most of them, it was proclaimed that on the day of the Great Return, along with the cargo, a Messiah would come. This mass, independent emergence of similar cults shows the cargo cult is not a curiosity, but a mirror of the collective human psyche. If a person does not understand the essence and only sees the form, he begins to resort to senseless rituals in an attempt to achieve an unimaginable miracle, which is nothing other than a sign of progress and technology. Many of these cults have disappeared, but some exist even today. For example, the cult of the messianic figure John Frum on the island of Tanna. It is believed that John Frum was a real American soldier who often told the locals, "I am John from America." The name got distorted to John Frum, and it became the name of a fictional prophet promoted by local priests. The natives believed that John Frum would return, bring endless treasures, and create a new world where everyone lives without poverty and suffering. We may laugh at these islanders, but as civilized, educated people living in the 2020s, aren't we ourselves repeating rituals rooted in our ancient ancestors' faith in gods from the heavens and their blessings? I'm not trying to offend the feelings of believers, since I understand that for many people around, especially in my country, Ukraine, where someone's children die every day, a ritual, whether a prayer or a candle in church, is at least some hope for something better. But nonetheless, we must accept the fact that the majority of what we do within our religiosity are rituals and ceremonies that essentially have no meaning. We do something that may be very archaic and whose essence we would not like if we only understood it. Once I told someone close to me that the ritual of the Eucharist or communion, when we consume wine and bread as the blood and flesh of Jesus, has its roots in much older pagan and shamanic rites, where union with a deity or spirit was achieved by eating its flesh or drinking its blood, that person was very offended by me and still doesn't talk to me. But it is the plain truth. In ancient cultures, such rituals existed for millennia. In Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Greece, people believed that the deity dies and is resurrected every year along with the harvest. Its flesh is the grain, its blood is the wine. The grain dies in the earth in order to resurrect. In the rituals of Osiris, Demeter, and Dionysus, participants literally ate symbolic food, bread and wine as the flesh and blood of the deity. The Christian Eucharist is practically a direct continuation of this line. Only Christ replaced the agricultural god of the harvest. In tribes of Africa, America, and Polynesia, there was a practice of eating parts of the body, literally or symbolically, of a totemic animal or an enemy. The meaning was to take into yourself the power of the one you have eaten. In shamanic cultures, for example, Siberian or Amazonian, priests consumed part of the sacrificial animal to absorb its spirit. The problem with blind ritual, which religious life basically comes down to, is that the meaning is lost behind the actions. Jesus came to earth so that we would become a better version of ourselves, so that we would adopt his morality and attitude toward others, learn to love as he did, learn to see God in others and discover him in ourselves. But instead of evolution and development, we have made a cult and ritual exactly like the islanders of Melanesia. That is why I ask you, do you understand the essence of your rituals? And what does it truly give you? After all, as was said in the previous video, 3/4 of humanity are believers, but if their faith is just the performance of rituals without attempting to reach a higher ideal, without understanding the essence of spirituality, without spiritual transformation, then does such a religion even make sense? Know yourself and you will know the gods in the universe. We have never been closer to that page in history when we ourselves, like those ancient god astronauts, will climb aboard a space shuttle and fly off to explore new planets. First, we will create a colony on Mars, and then, who knows? Perhaps one day we will arrive at some beautiful green planet with amazing birds, animals, and plants on which backward humanoids also live. We will see how they obtain food with a chisel and stick, how they freeze wrapped in animal skins, how they die from incurable diseases, the causes of which are simply harmless bacteria that we have long since conquered. We have long since overcome AIDS, COVID-19, and cancer. We live for thousands of years. We explore and study our wonderful and infinite universe simply because we can, because it is interesting, because evolution has no end. But here, on this God-forsaken planet, we suddenly encounter ourselves in a distant, distant past. Will we hurl antibiotics, canned food, flashlights, and clothing to these unfortunate ones? Will we crave their gratitude and worship? Will we seek prayers and sacrifices? Or perhaps our only goal will be to help accelerate their development, to stop them from killing each other, to nurture a new great civilization? If we descend to them from our ships, show them our smartphones and batteries, teach them the basics of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, agronomy, will we want them to choose regression instead of development? Were the Americans happy that the Melanesian islanders formed a cult and began worshipping their images and imitating their everyday life? Perhaps they would have preferred that these tribes develop their own science, build their own airplanes, factories to produce canned foods and other goods, their own clothing factories. And did Jesus Christ want us to become like him, to adopt his morality and understanding of God, to become kinder and more humane? Would he be happy to see that among his countless images, sculptures, and crosses, there is so little true understanding of his teaching? Following Jesus not through his truth, but through the ritual eating of his blood and flesh, seems to me one of humanity's most fatal mistakes, a mistake that, obviously, it is time to correct. How? By rejecting the form and trying to feel, to understand the essence. It seems that now, as we ourselves become similar to the ancient gods in our level of technology, the time has finally come to rethink old traditions and find new spiritual practices built on inner work rather than on external worship.